My name is Arthur Finchley, and I have always considered myself a man of logic, a purveyor of facts over fancy. By profession, I am an archivist, specializing in the preservation and study of historical documents. It is a career that rewards meticulous observation and a skeptical mind, traits I have cultivated assiduously over my 47 years. My work rarely takes me beyond the hallowed, dust-filled halls of the institutions I serve, but an unusual assignment had recently presented itself: the acquisition and authentication of a series of letters purported to be from a rather obscure 19th century industrialist, currently housed in a private collection in a remote part of the country. The most sensible, indeed the only practical, way to reach the estate was via the Night Watchman Express, an old, privately run sleeper train service that still traversed some of the lesser used lines, a relic of a bygone era. The prospect of an overnight train journey was not, in itself, unappealing. I have a certain fondness for the rhythmic clatter of wheels on rails, the gentle sway that can lull one into a state of contemplative calm. This particular service, however, was shrouded in a peculiar sort of local mystique. Scant information was available online, and the booking process itself had been an exercise in anachronistic communication, involving a series of polite but terse telephone calls and a ticket dispatched by registered post. The station from which the Night Watchman Express departed was not one of the city's grand, bustling terminals. Instead, it was a small, almost forgotten outpost on the industrial fringe, its Victorian architecture grimed with the soot of decades, its gas lamps casting a flickering, uncertain light as dusk began to settle. There were few other passengers in evidence, a handful of solitary figures who seemed to melt into the shadows, their faces obscured, their demeanor subdued. The air was heavy, with the scent of damp stone and something else, something metallic and faintly unsettling, like old blood or rusting iron. The train itself was a magnificent, if somewhat imposing, sight. Its carriages were of an older, heavier design, painted a deep, almost black crimson, with gold lettering spelling out Night Watchman Express in an ornate, slightly faded script. It looked less like a mode of public transport and more like a private conveyance from a Gothic novel. A uniformed attendant, his face pale and impassive, stood by the entrance to my designated carriage. He checked my ticket with a curt nod, his eyes dark and deep set, lingering on me for a moment longer than was comfortable. My compartment was at the far end of the carriage. It was surprisingly spacious, paneled in dark, polished wood, with a single berth, a small wash basin, and a window that looked out onto the rapidly darkening platform. An old-fashioned, tasseled lamp cast a warm, amber glow over the interior. It was all rather charmingly antiquated, and I felt a small measure of my earlier unease begin to dissipate. It was only after the train had lurched into motion, the rhythmic clack, clack of the wheels a familiar comfort, that I noticed the small, cream-colored card tucked into the frame of the mirror above the wash basin. It was printed in a simple, clear typeface. Under the heading, Arguios, San Sefti Yofour Pasangrs. I picked it up, expecting the usual banal instructions regarding smoking or luggage storage. What I read, however, caused a frown to crease my brow. The rules were as follows. 1. Upon retiring for the night, ensure your compartment door is locked from the inside. Do not open it for any reason until the first light of dawn, regardless of what you may hear. 2. Should you experience a sensation of unusual coldness or a persistent metallic scent, remain in your berth and do not look out of the window. The dining car service concludes at 10:00 p.m. No member of staff will approach your compartment offering refreshment after this time. Politely decline any such offers. 4. If you observe another passenger behaving in a distressed or erratic manner, do not engage. Alert the conductor at your earliest, discreet opportunity. 5. Personal items of reflective nature, mirrors, polished silver, etc., should be covered or stowed away after nightfall. 6. Should the train make an unscheduled stop in an unlit area, remain in your compartment with the blinds drawn. Do not attempt to ascertain the reason for the stop. 7. Whispering is to be avoided in the corridors after midnight. Sounds carry in peculiar ways on this line. 8. If you awaken to find a small, dark stain on your pillow or bed linen that was not there previously, do not touch it. Report it to the attendant upon disembarking. I read the list twice, a growing sense of incredulity mixing with a nascent disquiet. This was not the standard fare of railway regulations. It read more like a set of bizarre instructions for navigating a haunted house. My logical mind immediately sought rational explanations. Perhaps this was an elaborate prank, a piece of local folklore designed to amuse or unnerve tourists. Or maybe it was a poorly translated set of guidelines from another language, resulting in these odd pronouncements. Yet, the card was printed on good quality stock, the language precise and unambiguous. There was a seriousness to it that belied the notion of a simple joke. I recalled the attendant's unblinking stare, the somber atmosphere of the station. Preposterous, I muttered to myself, though a sliver of unease had lodged itself in my thoughts. I decided a walk to the dining car was in order. Perhaps a stiff drink to dispel this foolishness. The corridor outside my compartment was dimly lit, the ornate sconces casting long, dancing shadows. The plush carpet muffled my footsteps, creating an almost unnerving silence, broken only by the rhythmic sway and clatter of the train. I passed several other compartment doors, all closed. No sound emanating from within. It felt as though I were the only soul awake on this moving mausoleum. The dining car was a study in faded grandeur. Velvet curtains, heavy and wine-colored, framed the windows. Tables were laid with white linen, and surprisingly, good quality silverware, which I noted with a wry internal smile, remembering Rule 5. Only 2 other tables were occupied. At one, a solitary elderly woman with a severe expression stared blankly out at the passing darkness. At another, a young couple sat in silence, picking at their food with a distinct lack of appetite, their faces pale. I ordered a brandy, the amber liquid doing little to soothe the strange chill that had begun to settle over me. The waiter, a gaunt man with eyes that seemed to absorb the light, served me with a silent efficiency. that was more unnerving than reassuring. I tried to engage him in conversation, to ask about the regulations, but he merely offered a thin, almost imperceptible smile and retreated to the galley. Returning to my compartment, the list of rules seemed to loom larger in my mind. Rule 1: do not open it for any reason until the first light of dawn, regardless of what you may hear. What could one possibly hear that would tempt one to open the door against such a stern warning? As the hour grew later, the train seemed to pick up speed, hurtling through the inky blackness of the countryside. The rhythmic clatter became more insistent, the swaying more pronounced. I prepared for bed, meticulously checking the lock on my door. A heavy brass bolt that slid into place with a satisfying thud. I then drew the thick blinds over the window, though I hesitated for a moment, a strange compulsion urging me to look out. I resisted, remembering Rule 20: do not look out of the window. I lay in my berth, the sounds of the train filling the silence. The gentle rocking, usually soporific, now seemed to carry a subtle undercurrent of menace. My mind kept replaying the list of rules, each one more unsettling than the last. A persistent metallic scent. No member of staff will approach. Personal items of a reflective nature. An unscheduled stop. Whispering. A small, dark stain. It must have been well after midnight when I was jolted from a light doze by a sound from the corridor. It was a soft, dragging noise, accompanied by a faint, almost inaudible whimpering. My heart hammered against my ribs. I strained my ears, listening intently. The dragging sound seemed to be moving slowly past my door. Then, a soft scratching, like fingernails drawn lightly across the wood. Rule 1: do not open it for any reason, regardless of what you may hear. The logical part of my brain screamed that was probably just another passenger, perhaps unwell, or a member of staff going about their duties. But the sheer, unadulterated terror that gripped me was anything but logical. The scratching came again, more insistent this time, followed by a low, guttural moan that did not sound entirely human. I lay there, frozen, my breath caught in my throat. The sounds continued for what felt like an eternity, a slow, agonizing passage just outside my sealed compartment. Then, as suddenly as they had begun, they faded into the distance, swallowed by the relentless rhythm of the train. Sleep, I knew, would be impossible now. Every nerve in my body was alight. Every shadow in the compartment seemed to wreathe with unseen threats. I found myself staring at the small, brass wash basin, its surface gleaming faintly in the dim light from under the door. Rule 5: personal items of a reflective nature should be covered or stowed away after nightfall. With trembling hands, I reached for the small towel and draped it over the basin, obscuring its reflective surface. It was a small, perhaps irrational, act, but it brought a sliver of comfort in the oppressive darkness. The hours crawled by, each tick of my pocket watch amplified in the silence. The train continued its relentless journey through the night, a steel serpent rushing through a sleeping world. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that not everything on this train was asleep. and the rules, which I had initially dismissed as an eccentric folly, now felt like the only fragile barrier between myself and whatever horrors the Night Watchman Express held within its crimson carriages. The first light of dawn, I realized, could not come soon enough. The remainder of the night passed in a state of heightened, agonizing awareness. Every creak of the carriage, every distant rumble of the wheels, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through my system. I did not dare to close my eyes for more than a few moments at a time, convinced that some unseen horror lurked just beyond the thin veneer of my compartment door, or perhaps even within the shadows of the room itself. The image of the small, cream-colored card and its cryptic rules remained seared into my mind. As the first faint gray light of pre-dawn began to seep through the edges of the window blinds, a profound, if wary, sense of relief washed over me. I had survived the night, or at least the darkest hours of it. Rule 1 had stated, "Do not open it for any reason until the first light of dawn." Dawn was now breaking, albeit reluctantly. With cautious, deliberate movements, I rose from my berth. My limbs were stiff, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep. The air in the compartment felt stale and heavy, still carrying that faint, unsettling metallic tang I had noticed earlier, the very scent mentioned in Rule 2. I made a mental note of it, the archivist in me cataloging the peculiarity even as my nerves frayed. I approached the door, my hand hesitating over the brass bolt. The sounds from the corridor, the dragging, the scratching, the inhuman moans had long since ceased, but their memory was vivid and disturbing. Taking a deep breath, I slid the bolt back. The click echoed loudly in the confined space. Peering out into the corridor, I found it empty. The dim sconces still cast their flickering light, but the oppressive atmosphere of the night seemed to have lessened somewhat with the approaching day. There was no sign of what might have caused the disturbances. The plush carpet lay undisturbed. No marks, no stains. Nothing to indicate the terrifying passage I had witnessed. My first instinct was to find the conductor, to report what I had heard, perhaps even to demand an explanation for the bizarre set of regulations. But then Rule 4 came to mind. If you observe another passenger behaving in a distressed or erratic manner, do not engage. Alert the conductor at your earliest discreet opportunity. While I hadn't seen another passenger, the sounds were certainly indicative of distress, if not something far worse, and the rules themselves implied that direct confrontation was not advisable. I decided to wait, to observe. Perhaps the light of day would bring clarity, or at least other passengers with whom I could confer. I performed my morning ablutions, carefully avoiding looking too closely at my own reflection in the now uncovered wash basin mirror, a lingering effect of Rule 5. My own face looked back at me, pale and drawn. The eyes of a man who had not slept, but had instead stared into some nameless dread. A soft chime echoed through the carriage, followed by a crackling announcement over an unseen intercom system. The voice was clipped and devoid of emotion. Breakfast is now being served in the dining car. The Night Watchman Express will be arriving at its final destination. Ashworth Terminus, at approximately 8:15 a.m. The thought of food was not particularly appealing, but the prospect of seeing other people, of escaping the claustrophobic confines of my compartment, was. I made my way back to the dining car. It was more populated than it had been the previous evening. The elderly woman with the severe expression was there again, nursing a cup of tea, her gaze still fixed on some distant, unseen point. The young couple also sat at their table, though they looked even more haggard than before, dark circles under their eyes. They spoke in hushed tones, occasionally casting furtive glances around the car. Several other passengers were present now. A portly businessman engrossed in a newspaper, a woman in traveling tweeds sketching in a notebook, and a man with a heavily bandaged hand, who seemed to be in some discomfort. I took a seat at an empty table, and the same gaunt waiter from the previous night approached. He placed a menu before me without a word. I ordered coffee and toast, my appetite still minimal. "Excuse me," I began, attempting to keep my voice even, "about those regulations in the compartments." The waiter paused, his eyes, like chips of obsidian, meeting mine. For a moment, I thought he might respond, but then that same thin, unsettling smile touched his lips. He inclined his head slightly and moved away without a word, leaving my question hanging in the air. Frustration mingled with my unease. It was clear that the staff were not going to be forthcoming. I glanced towards the young couple. They had stopped their hushed conversation and were now looking directly at me, an expression of shared anxiety on their faces. The woman, who couldn't have been much older than 25, had wide, frightened eyes. As the waiter moved out of earshot, the young man leaned forward slightly. "You saw the rules too, then?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, a direct contravention of Rule 7, though it was not yet past midnight, of course. I nodded. "Indeed. And I heard certain things in the corridor last night." A look of profound fear crossed the woman's face. "The scratching," she whispered, her hand instinctively going to her husband's arm, "and the moaning." "Yes," I confirmed, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. "Precisely that." "We heard it too," the man said, his voice strained. "We locked our door. Just like the card said. It went on for ages. We thought whatever it was would try to get in." "Did you see anything?" I asked. They both shook their heads. "We didn't dare look," the woman replied, her voice trembling. "Rule 1 and Rule 2. About not looking out the window if you feel a coldness." Our compartment became freezing just before the sound started. A chill traced its way down my own spine. My compartment hadn't become noticeably colder, but the metallic scent had been undeniable. It seemed the phenomena were not uniform, or perhaps different rules were triggered by different entities. "And the stain?" I asked, remembering Rule 8. "Did either of you notice anything like that?" They exchanged a horrified glance. "No," the man said a little too quickly. "Nothing at all." But his eyes darted nervously towards his wife, and I had the distinct impression he was not being entirely truthful. Before I could press further, the portly businessman at a nearby table cleared his throat loudly. "One really shouldn't discuss such morbid fancies," he said, his voice pompous, though his eyes betrayed a hint of nervousness. "It's merely the company's way of adding a bit of theatricality to the journey. Old train, old stories. You understand?" He rustled his newspaper pointedly, clearly indicating the conversation was over. The young couple shrank back, and I was left to ponder his words. Was it possible? Could this all be an elaborate, albeit unsettling, piece of theater? The attendant's demeanor, the waiter's silence, the rules themselves, could they be part of a carefully constructed performance? My logical mind wanted to believe it, to grasp at this rational explanation. Yet, the genuine fear I had witnessed in the young couple, the visceral terror I myself had experienced during the night, felt far too real to be dismissed so easily. And the metallic scent, the coldness they described, these were physical sensations, not mere suggestions. The train began to slow, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels decreasing. Outside, the gray light had strengthened, revealing a landscape of rolling hills shrouded in mist. We were approaching Ashworth Terminus. As passengers began to gather their belongings, I noticed the man with the bandaged hand. He was pale and sweating, despite the coolness of the morning. His eyes darted around nervously, and he seemed to be avoiding contact with anyone. I recalled rule: if you observe another passenger behaving in a distressed or erratic manner, do not engage. Alert the conductor at your earliest, discreet opportunity. His distress was palpable. The train glided into the station, a small, rural stop that looked as though it hadn't changed much in 100 years. The platform was almost deserted. As I disembarked, I looked for the conductor, intending to mention the man with the bandaged hand, and, perhaps, if I dared, to ask about the rules one last time. The same impassive attendant, who had greeted me the previous evening, stood by the carriage door, his face a mask. "Excuse me," I said. "The conductor." He gestured with his head towards a small, official-looking building at the end of the platform. "Office." I thanked him and made my way towards it. As I did, I saw the man with the bandaged hurry off the train, clutching his injured limb, and disappear quickly down a side street. Without a backward glance, he seemed desperate to get away. The conductor's office was small and sparsely furnished. A man in a slightly more ornate uniform than the attendant sat behind a large wooden desk, poring over a ledger. He looked up as I entered, his expression neutral. "Mr. Finchley?" he asked, before I had even spoken. I was taken aback. "Yes." "How did you know?" "We have a limited passenger list on the night watchman, sir. And you are the only one scheduled to disembark who has not, yet, checked out, so to speak." His smile was as thin and unreadable as the waiter's. "I see," I said, feeling a renewed sense of unease. "I wish to report something." A passenger, a man with a bandaged hand, seemed quite distressed. The conductor nodded slowly. "Ah, yes, Mr. Henderson. An unfortunate accident with some luggage, I believe. He is being attended to." His response was too smooth, too rehearsed. I didn't believe him. "And the rules?" I pressed. "The regulations in the compartments." What is their purpose? The conductor leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. The Night Watchman Express is a very old service, Mr. Finchley. It operates on lines that have seen a great deal of history. The rules are simply precautions for the comfort and safety of our passengers. He enunciated the last words with a peculiar emphasis, the same phrase that headed the card. Precautions against what? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He held my gaze for a long moment, his eyes unblinking. Against the discomforts of the night, Mr. Finchley. Some journeys are more taxing than others. We trust yours was uneventful. The implication was clear. He knew. He knew what transpired on his train, and he was not going to elaborate. Defeated, I merely nodded. Yes. Uneventful. Excellent, he said, his smile widening fractionally. We trust you will consider the Night Watchman Press for your future travel needs. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. As I left the station and stepped out into the cool morning air of Ashworth, I felt as though I had surfaced from some deep, dark water. The mundane reality of the small town, with its bakery smells and distant church bells, was a stark contrast to the oppressive, rule-bound world of the train. My assignment was a few miles distant. I resolved to hire a car, to put as much distance between myself and that cursed railway line as possible. But I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the rules of the Night Watchman Express and the horrors they hinted at would haunt my thoughts for a long time to come. And a small, nagging part of me wondered about Rule 8, the dark stain. Had the young couple truly not seen one? Or had they simply been too afraid to admit it? The journey was over, but the unease lingered, a metallic taste in the back of my throat. My business in Ashworth, the authentication of the aforementioned 19th century letters, should have been a straightforward affair. The collection was housed in a rather dilapidated manor house a few miles from the town, owned by a reclusive descendant of the industrialist. Under normal circumstances, I would have approached the task with my usual professional detachment and intellectual curiosity. However, the shadow of the Night Watchman Express loomed large. Its unsettling rules and the pervasive sense of dread I had experienced aboard it tainting my every thought. I hired a motor car. As planned, a sturdy but unremarkable vehicle, and the drive through the mist-laden countryside did little to dispel my unease. Every shadowed copse of trees, every isolated farmhouse, seemed to hold a whisper of the same unknown menace that had permeated the train. The metallic scent, though fainter now, still seemed to cling to the back of my throat, a phantom reminder of Rule 2. The manor house, when I finally reached it, was a Gothic pile that looked as though it had sprung directly from the pages of one of Mrs. Radcliffe's less cheerful novels. Its owner, a Mr. Silas Blackwood, was as eccentric as his dwelling, a gaunt, elderly man with eyes that seemed to hold a deep, wary knowledge of things best left unspoken. He greeted me with a dry, rustling voice and led me to a cavernous library where the letters were kept. Ordinarily, the sight of such a trove of historical documents would have filled me with a quiet excitement. But as I sat at a large oak desk, The precious papers spread before me. I found my concentration wavering. My mind kept drifting back to the train, the locked door, the scratching sounds, the conductor's knowing, yet uninformative smile. Rule 8, concerning the unexplained dark stain, gnawed at me. Had the young couple lied? Or had they simply been too terrified to acknowledge what they might have found? The image of the man with the bandaged hand, Mr. Henderson, also kept intruding, his palpable fear, his hasty departure. What unfortunate accident with some luggage could elicit such a reaction and require such heavy bandaging? Mr. Blackwood, despite his initial reticence, proved to be a surprisingly astute observer. After several hours of my rather distracted attempts at authentication, during which I fear my scholarly rigor was somewhat lacking, he cleared his throat. "You seem troubled, Mr. Finchley," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Beyond the usual wariness of travel, I mean. You arrived on the Night Watchman, did you not?" I looked up, surprised. "Yes, I did. How did you surmise?" A faint, almost melancholic smile touched his lips. "Few arrive in Ashworth by that particular service anymore. And those who do often carry a certain atmosphere with them." He paused, his gaze distant. "It is an old line, Mr. Finchley. Very old. It runs through lands that have seen more than their share of sorrow and strangeness." His words, so reminiscent of the conductor's own veiled warnings, sent a fresh chill through me. Here was an educated man, a custodian of history, speaking of the train, not as a mere mode of transport, but as something imbued with a deeper, darker significance. "The regulations," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you familiar with them?" Mr. Blackwood nodded slowly. "Ah, yes. A necessary precaution, I am told. Though some say the rules are as much a part of their experience as the journey itself." "Experience of what?" "Precisely." I pressed, emboldened by his willingness to discuss the matter, however obliquely. He looked at me then, his eyes sharp and piercing, like those of an ancient bird. "Some things, Mr. Finchley, are best left undisturbed. Some doors are best left unopened. The Night Watchman, it passes through places where the veil between worlds is thin. The rules are there to guide those who inadvertently stray too close to what lies beyond." His words, though steeped in what I would normally dismiss as superstitious folklore, resonated with the terror I had felt. The dragging, the moaning, these were not the sounds of the mundane world. "The other passengers," I said, thinking of the young couple, of Mr. Henderson. Do they always follow the rules?" Mr. Blackwood's smile faded. "Not always. Curiosity is a powerful human trait, as is disbelief. Some find the temptation to look, to open the door, too strong to resist. The train, it has a way of testing its passengers." He gestured vaguely towards a bookshelf laden with ancient, leather-bound tomes. "There are stories, local legends, of course, of passengers who did not heed the warnings, of those who vanished entirely between one station and the next, or those who disembarked, changed. The word hung in the air. I thought of Mr. Henderson's bandaged hand, his frantic escape. Had he broken a rule? Had he touched something he shouldn't have? Perhaps the dark stain of Rule 8 was not merely a stain, but a sign of contact, a mark left by something. I spent 2 days at Ashworth Manor, completing my work with a diligence born more of a desire to escape than of professional zeal. Mr. Blackwood remained a cryptic, but not unkind host. He never elaborated further on the mysteries of the Night Watchman Express. But his earlier words had confirmed my deepest fears. The train was not merely a conveyance, but a conduit. And the rules were a fragile shield against an unnamed, unseen malevolence. The journey back to the city was, thankfully, by a different, more modern railway line, one that traveled in broad daylight and stopped at brightly lit, bustling stations. Yet, even amidst the reassuring normality of this return trip, I found myself glancing nervously at locked compartment doors, flinching at unexpected noises in the corridor. The experience on the Night Watchman had left an indelible mark. Upon my return, I attempted to research the Night Watchman Express. My archival skills, usually so effective, yielded frustratingly little. There were no official company records, beyond the most basic registration. Mentions in old newspapers were scant and uninformative. It was as if the train operated in a reality all its own, shielded from public scrutiny. I found a few obscure local history forums online where whispers and anecdotal accounts could be found, tales of strange lights seen from the train, of passengers who reported lost time, of an unnerving coldness that settled in certain carriages. But these were dismissed by most as urban legends, the fanciful imaginings of an overactive mind. I knew better. I had felt the cold, smelled the metallic tang, heard the scratching at my door. Weeks turned into months. The sharp edges of the terror began to dull, but the unease remained, a low hum beneath the surface of my daily life. I found myself more prone to introspection, less certain of the solid, logical world I had always inhabited. Sleep was often disturbed by fragmented dreams of dark corridors, locked doors, and the rhythmic, relentless clatter of unseen wheels. One evening, sorting through a box of uncatalogued ephemera in the archives, a task I usually found soothing, I came across a small, faded photograph. It depicted a group of railway workers from the late Victorian era, standing proudly in front of a steam locomotive. The engine bore no name, but its design was heavy, archaic. It was the faces of the men that caught my attention. They were pale, their expressions uniformly grim, their eyes holding a haunted, watchful quality. And the attendant who had checked my ticket of the Night Watchman Express, or a man who could have been his identical ancestor, stood amongst them, his face unchanged by the intervening decades. My blood ran cold. I dropped the photograph as if it had burned my fingers. This was no coincidence. The staff of the Night Watchman, like the train itself, seemed to exist outside the normal flow of time. The rules, I now understood, were not just for a single journey. They were a timeless pact, a set of commandments for navigating a realm that bordered our own, a realm that the Night Watchman Express, for reasons unknown, traversed with unnerving regularity. And I, Arthur Finchley, man of logic and reason, had been a passenger. I had followed the rules, mostly. But the question that continued to plague me, the one that surfaced in the darkest hours of the night, was what fate befell those who did not. And was the metallic taste that sometimes still lingered in my mouth merely a memory, or a sign that some part of that other realm had, despite my caution, latched onto me? The final rule, Rule 8, about the dark stain, remained the most enigmatic, the most personally terrifying. I had not seen one in my compartment, but the very idea that such a thing could manifest, a physical mark of some unholy visitation, was a horror that my rational mind struggled and failed to fully dismiss. The discovery of the photograph, with the attendant's ageless face staring out from a bygone century, was a turning point. It shattered the last vestiges of my skepticism. The comfortable illusion that my experience on the Night Watchman Express could be rationalized away as an elaborate hoax or a stress-induced hallucination. The train was real, its horrors were real, and its crew were seemingly untouched by the passage of time. Eternal servants of that damned line. My life, once a predictable and orderly affair, became increasingly consumed by an obsession with the Night Watchman. The archives, once my sanctuary, now felt like a hunting ground. I began to delve into the most obscure and forgotten corners of our collection, searching for any further mention, any scrap of information that might shed light on the train's origins or its true purpose. I cross-referenced old railway ledgers, local parish records from the areas the line traversed, and even delved into collections of folklore and occult literature, a pursuit I would have once scorned as utterly unscholarly. What I found was fragmented, veiled in allegory and superstition, but a pattern began to emerge. The railway line upon which the Night Watchman ran was indeed ancient, far older than the steam era. It followed a path that had been a ley line, a track used for centuries, perhaps millennia, for purposes unknown, pilgrimages, processions, or something far darker. Stories abounded of strange disappearances, of unsettling encounters, long before the first iron rails were laid. The train, it seemed, had merely inherited the malevolence of the land it crossed. There were whispers of a pact made by the original founders of the railway company, a desperate measure to ensure the line's prosperity through notoriously difficult and sparsely populated terrain. A pact with something. Something that demanded a certain toll, a periodic tribute, not of money, but of something less tangible, more vital. The rules, I began to suspect, were not just for the protection of passengers, but perhaps also a means of selecting or preparing this tribute. The metallic scent, the unnatural cold, the whispering, these were the markers of its presence, the thinning of the veil Mr. Blackwood had spoken of. And Rule 8, the dark stain. I found a particularly chilling account in a privately printed diary from the 1880s, written by a clergyman who had traveled the line. He described awakening to find such a mark on his pristine white collar, a small, viscous smear that seemed to absorb the light. He wrote of a profound spiritual sickness that overcame him afterwards, a draining of faith and vitality, as if some essential part of his soul had been leached. He died a few months later, a hollow shell of his former self. This discovery filled me with a cold dread. Had I narrowly escaped such a fate? Or was the lingering, metallic taste, the persistent unease, a sign that my own encounter had left a more subtle, insidious mark? I thought again of the other passengers. The young couple, had they found a stain and, in their terror, disposed of the evidence, or feigned ignorance? Their pale, haunted faces suggested a deeper trauma than mere fright. And Mr. Henderson, with his bandaged hand, what had he touched? What had touched him? Had he, in a moment of panic or defiance, broken Rule 8 and attempted to wipe away the stain, only to suffer a more direct physical consequence? The more I learned, the more I realized the Night Watchman Express was not just a train, but a mechanism, a carefully maintained system for interacting with, and perhaps appeasing, whatever entity claimed to that ancient track. The timeless attendants were its guardians, its priests, ensuring the smooth operation of this unholy compact. My research took a toll. I became withdrawn, my colleagues noting my haggard appearance and distracted demeanor. Sleep offered no respite, only a recurring nightmare. I am on the train, the corridor is endless, and every door I try is locked. The scratching sound is behind me, getting closer. I can smell the metallic tang, feel the unnatural cold. And I know, with a certainty that freezes my soul, that if I am caught, I will not merely die, but be changed, incorporated into the train's spectral crew, or offered up as sustenance. One evening, driven by a desperation I could no longer contain, I resolved to find the young couple. Their fear had been too genuine, their shared experience too similar to my own. If anyone could corroborate my growing understanding or offer some solace, it was them. Their names, I recalled from a brief glance at the passenger manifest the conductor had inadvertently left visible, were Mr. and Mrs. Alastair Finch. A common enough name, but I had a starting point. It took weeks of discreet inquiries, leveraging my archival contacts and sifting through public records. But I eventually traced them to a small cottage in a quiet village, far from any railway line. It was with a heavy heart and a sense of impending revelation that I made the journey. The cottage was idyllic on the surface. Roses around the door, a neatly tended garden. But a palpable sense of sorrow hung in the air. Mrs. Finch answered the door. She was even paler and thinner than I remembered, her eyes holding a profound, inconsolable grief. When she recognized me, a flicker of something fear, perhaps, or a grim understanding crossed her face. She invited me in, her voice a mere whisper. The cottage was sparsely furnished, impeccably clean, but with an atmosphere of stillness, of a life put on hold. Mr. Finch was not there. Alastair, she began, her voice trembling. He hasn't been well since that journey. She explained, in halting, painful sentences, what had transpired after they disembarked. They had indeed found a small, dark stain on their bed linen. Alastair, a man of pragmatic and somewhat impatient temperament, had dismissed it as a spillage, an oil mark from the train. Against her pleas, he had touched it, tried to wipe it away with his handkerchief. From that day, he had begun to change. A creeping coldness entered him, a listlessness that no doctor could diagnose. He lost interest in his work, in food, in life itself. He would spend hours staring blankly, a faint metallic scent clinging to him. His hand, the one that had touched the stain, began to wither, the skin becoming dry and discolored, as if blighted from within. It was not a bandage he needed, but an amputation of the soul. He was now in a private sanatorium, his condition deteriorating daily. The doctors were baffled, speaking of rare neurological disorders, of psychosomatic illness. But Mrs. Finch knew, as I knew, that the cause was far more sinister. The rules. She whispered, tears streaming down her face. We should have understood. He should never have touched it. Her story confirmed my worst fears. Rule 8 was not a warning about hygiene. It was a commandment against direct contact with the mark of the entity, a mark that seemed to initiate a process of consumption, of spiritual decay. Mr. Henderson's bandaged hand was likely a similar, perhaps more aggressive, manifestation. There was little I could offer Mrs. Finch in the way of comfort. My knowledge was a burden, not a solace. I left the cottage with a heavier heart than ever, the full, horrifying implications of the Night Watchman Express laid bare. I have not ridden a train since. I cannot. The rhythmic clatter of wheels on rails, once a soothing sound, now evokes only a visceral terror. I continue my work in the archives, but it is a hollow pursuit. The world of facts and logic I once inhabited seems a fragile facade, easily torn by the horrors that lurk just beyond our understanding. The Night Watchman Express still runs. I am sure of it. It continues its timeless journey through the shadowed corners of the land, its ageless attendants ensuring the rules are presented, the pact upheld. And I am left with the chilling knowledge that I was a passenger, that I brushed against a darkness far older and more malevolent than I could have ever imagined. I followed the rules. For the most part, I did not open my door. I did not look out of the window when the coldness came. I covered the reflective surfaces. I did not touch any stain. And yet, the metallic taste sometimes returns, unbidden. A faint scent of rust and decay in an empty room. A fleeting glimpse of a pale, watching face in a crowd. A face that could belong to the attendant. Have I truly escaped? Or am I merely one of the changed, marked in a way I cannot yet perceive, my own vitality slowly, imperceptibly, being siphoned away? The rules are a shield, yes, but perhaps no shield is perfect against such an ancient and insidious power. I was a passenger on an overnight train. They had a strange set of rules, and I fear, with every fiber of my being, that my journey is not yet truly over. The Night Watchman always collects its due, one way or another. And the final stop is a destination I dare not contemplate.